Alright folks, let's switch it up a bit and take a look at Tales of the Arabian Nights. Now this is a somewhat old storytelling game, and storytelling games are not a dime a dozen, as you might think, unless you're counting tabletop RPGs. In this game, as many people would say, it's not necessarily about winning the game, although it is a competitive game and there will be a winner. It's more about having an adventure and telling a story and laughing a lot along the way. That's not everyone's cup of tea, and many people have already tuned out if they've never heard of this game before. But some people really enjoy that. I definitely came to it with the idea that I would enjoy it greatly, having come from a tabletop RPG background. Did it disappoint? Did it live up to all the expectations I had for it? And will it live up to your expectations? Let's take a look. Tales of the Arabian Nights isn't too complicated of a game, but there are a lot of little bits to it, so and a lot of little details when it involves figuring out the storyline, so I may get some little details wrong, and I can't go over every single little thing, but don't hold that against me and just take this for what it is, which is a brief walkthrough of the game in order to let you know what it's basically all about. So at the beginning, a couple of things you're going to do first for setup, and I apologize if I can't fit every single thing on the screen here. First, every player is going to get one of these little player boards. They're all exactly the same. It's going to have little cheat sheets over here and encounter reaction choices, which are all the same for all the players, and all the different lists of all the different available skills, and a place to put your player token. And speaking of that, the other thing you're going to do is choose one of the 6 characters in the game. You have Shahrazad, you have Zumurud, Ali Baba, Maruf, Aladdin. Maruf is on fire. Sinbad. You'll choose one of them, you'll get a little plastic standee, and then you're going to put them in Baghdad. And then you have a bunch of little tokens, if the standee stays up. Then you have a bunch of little tokens that are keyed to the color and name of your character. So for instance, if I was doing Shahrazad, I would take the Shahrazad token, and you see there are 2 different the gender signs here. I'll flip it over to female to begin with, and then I'm going to put that on my player board, designating it as my player board. Now, all the characters are basically the same. The only thing that really is significant is the gender at the beginning, because your sex can change. Yes, that can happen. And your gender is actually going to determine what happens during certain adventures. You also have all these other little fiddly bits like quest tokens, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. You have story and destiny markers, which are how you're actually going to win the game. Wealth marker, origin and destination for certain quests as well. Now, the next thing you're going to do, and this has to do with the victory conditions of the game, is determine your destiny and story goals. So the point of the game is that you're trying to have the grandest adventure. Now you're going to do that by having both destiny. There's a destiny track here and a story track over there, which is where you're going to start off. You're going to put all the players are going to put the little tokens at the beginning of those tracks. Then at the setup, every player is going to choose any combination of 10. You have to have a total of 20 destiny or story points to work towards. And you separate them however you want. So in other words, if you want to set your goals as 12 destiny points and 8 story points, you can do that. You can do 10 and 10. You can do 19 story points and 1 destiny point, however you want to do it. And then you're actually going to, these are all in different types of denominations. You'll secretly choose those ones that you want and either put them face down in front of you like this, or you'll actually shove them underneath your player board, however you want to do it. Doesn't really matter. The goal is that you're trying to not let the other players know what points you're trying to get to, so they don't know when the game is going to end. And the game will end once you get your point totals to what you preset at the beginning, and then make it back to Baghdad before the end of your turn. Then you win the game. Or I should say then every other player gets another turn, and then if no one else has met their win condition either, you'll be the only player. But it is possible that multiple players will win the game. The other little bit of setup is that you're going to have these different skills that you can choose from. Remember that I said there's a cheat sheet of skills there, that all the ones that are different and available in the game. But at the beginning, starting with the first player, you're each going to go in turn order, picking a skill until everyone has 3 skills. And there's stuff like wisdom, and bargaining and evaluation, storytelling. There's other things like sneaking and magic and piety, all kinds of different stuff. And on each token, like this is the appearance token, there's also a master side. Now you start off on the basic talent side, and then eventually some story things might tell you to go over to the master side. But basically, after setup, you should have 3 of those. Now you're done setting up your character. There's some other little things to take care of as well. First off, you have morning, noon, and night tokens. You're going to make sure that the morning token is over by the encounter deck. Just leave it next to it. You're going to go through the encounter deck as you go through the game. Once you go through the encounter deck once, you'll remove this and put the noon token out. If you go through the deck, you'll reshuffle and put the noon token out. Once you go through the deck again, you'll put the night token out. And then if you have to go through it again, you'll just reshuffle and leave the night token out. I should tell you that it is very unlikely you'll ever get to the night token, at least in the games that I played. So, unless we were doing something wrong. So, you also have treasure decks and quest decks. Every player is going to start with a quest card, but I'll explain more about that in a minute. I'll explain the treasures can be gained during the game by going through certain encounters successfully. Encounters always happen when you move to a new area. And finally, there is an entire stack of status cards. Now, status cards are just kept face up near the board and they're not shuffled. Just leave them in alphabetical order. These are basically both negative and positive things that can happen to you as a result of certain adventures and storylines you go through. There's accursed, there's blessed, beloved, crippled, diseased, ensorcelled, respected, robe of honor, scorned, resurrected, sex change, that's fun, wounded, all these different things that could happen to you. Now, you also have a wealth track over the top of the board. And I know I apologize, it's kind of hard to see, but it goes all the way from beggar up to fabulously wealthy. And that's going to modify and change, of course, like most other things, according to what happens during your adventures. But everyone's going to start off at poor, and that actually, the wealth track is important, not just for certain adventures, depending and affects how you're seen by certain people, but also because it determines your movement. You have both land and sea movement, and that's going to modify and change according to where you are on the wealth track. It doesn't necessarily mean that the wealthier you are, the faster you can move. You do get the best sea travel when you're fabulously wealthy, but you also have the worst land travel because it's really hard for a sultan to just move around without having a big crowd and retinue around him. But basically how the turn order is going to go is that the first thing you're going to do is optionally move. You don't have to move, but even if you don't move, you're still going to have an encounter at the place that you are. And ideally, you're going to be working towards something. Like I said, you're going to get a quest card at the beginning, and that's going to give you some idea of what you want to work towards in order to get more destiny and story points. If you successfully meet your quest condition, it's usually going to give you a reward. So you might choose to just move, and you can move whatever your space is. You can mix and match your land and sea movement, but you can never move more spaces than your highest mode of movement. Or, for instance, if your mode of movement was 3 by land, 5 by sea, you could only move a maximum of 5 spaces, and only 3 of those can be by land, and so on and so forth. But wherever you end up, you're going to have an encounter after you move. The first thing you're going to do is draw a card from the encounter deck, and if it's some of them are character cards, so we have the prophets, we have the wizard, and we have the enchantress. And the important thing about this card, you can this kind of gives you a flavor of what your adventure will be like, but really, you need to know these numbers. And of course, this corresponds to the token that's going to be near the encounter deck, which I moved. So, assuming you're in the morning, you're going to look at the morning number down here. And that's going to tell you where to go in the book, which I'll get to in a minute, but you also have locations. Now, locations work the same way, except that they have different numbers here. You're going to look at whatever number of the location you're at. So, for instance, if I move Scheherazade here, I know you can't see it, but there is like a brown gem. Then I would look at the brown gem on this card, which in this case is a 75. That's the important part. Every card has one that is a letter N, which behaves a little bit differently, which I'll explain in a minute. And then you have the city encounter cards. Now, the city encounter cards have a number down at the bottom too, and that's the important number that you want. and it'll behave just like the other encounter cards, but the difference here is that regardless of what happens with the encounter, you have the option of keeping this card. If you keep this card and can actually make it to the city that is pictured here, you get to turn in this card and roll a d6 and get whatever either beneficial or unbeneficial, if that's a word, thing that happens here at your option. So how do these encounters work that I keep talking about? So this is a little complicated, so kind of stick with me. First off, assuming you're playing with 3 or more players, one player is going to be designated as the reader when it's your turn. So the player to your left is going to get this book, this big book. And try not to read this book ahead of time because it could spoil some things, although there's a lot of stuff in that book. It'd be kind of hard to do. The player to your right gets this reaction matrix, and I'm sorry, this one's kind of in some rough shape. But if is just a normal character card, or regardless of what kind of card it is, you're going to go to that number at the beginning of the book where there are a bunch of charts. If you get to a place on the terrain card where there's an N, it behaves a little differently. You're actually going to go straight to the reaction matrix. But let's get to that in a moment. So let's go with the Enchantress. The Enchantress tells me to go to 1:14 in the morning. So I'm going to go in this book, and I'm going to go in the beginning, and I'm going to go to 1:14, which tells me matrix B. So the next thing you're going to do is roll some dice. You'll roll 1 die, see whatever the number comes up with. Now, if there is a actual number in the city that you're at, and this particular city does not have a number in it, but if it did have a number, you would add it to that die value of whatever you rolled. You would also, if you have 3 or 4 destiny points, or if you have 5 or more, you'll actually add a 1 or a 2, depending on which one it is, to that die roll as well. If it's anything more than a 12, you're just going to count it as a 12. But whatever number you end up with, that's where you're going to go on the reaction matrix. So or in the chart on the book. So for 1:14, that means if I rolled a 4, there's no number on the city. I don't have any destiny points yet. That means I'm just going to go to 4. So that means self-sacrificial. So I've run into a self-sacrificial Enchantress. But I'm not quite done yet. So up at the top it says I need to go to matrix B. That actually is telling me to go to my player board and go to B on my encounter reaction choices. And I need to determine what I'm going to do to this sacrificial Enchantress. Am I going to grovel? Am I going to aid her? Am I going to rob her? Am I going to avoid her? Am I going to try to bargain with her? Am I going to try to attack her? Am I going to court her? Am I going to trick her, or am I going to hire her? I have no other information to go on. I just need to choose one of those choices. Now, I could look at some of the skills that I have. Remember that I should have 3 of these little talents ahead of time and determine that I might be good at something. But really, a lot of it is just random chance. Even if you think you might be good at courting her, it's really up to the book what's actually going to happen. So you're just going to need to do your best guess and pick one of those. So let's say that I decide to, let's go with court her. I'm going to try to court her. So having courted her, now it's going to be on the player to your right who has the reaction matrix. We're going to go to whatever letter that said, so that was B. So we'll go to B on the reaction matrix, and we're going to go down to the self-sacrificial part here, which is, I'm sorry, it's right here. So we're in matrix B, self-sacrificial. I decided to court her, so we're going to go all the way over here to court. And right there, that is the number. That is 433. Now, there's one last thing we need to do. We need to take that number 433, and there's one more die we need to roll, and that is this destiny die here. This has a blank side, a plus, and a minus side. If you roll a blank side, nothing happens. If you roll a plus or minus, you're going to subtract or add 1 to that number. So I rolled a plus sign. The number was 433. So the reader needs to go to paragraph 434 in the book. So let me just go ahead and find that. Hey, I found it rather quickly. 434. Now the reader is going to read what happens to me. By the way, spoiler alert. So if it ever refers to the other, that means you have a character card, so you're actually going to refer to whatever the character card is. So in this case, it's the Enchantress. So the Enchantress tells you that she has duties which must be performed. So now it comes down to skills. So me as a player, I don't get to see this. The storyteller simply says, do you have seduction? Do you have storytelling? If you don't have any of those things, you must go to the no skill selection. So I don't have those skills, and I have to do that. Now, even if you do have those skills, you can optionally choose not to use them if you're not in a very seductive or storytelling mood. But regardless, whichever one you choose or have to choose, the reader is going to tell you what happens. So let's say that I had seduction. If I was the opposite sex, which in this case I'm not actually, I'm sorry, I optionally have the choice of using appearance, but I can only use seduction if I'm of the opposite sex. Let's say I use appearance. However, a bit of dalliance never hurt anyone. You spend a few hours of bliss. I think we all know what that means. Now, there's some numbers in parentheses here. That's the reward I get for successfully doing it. D refers to destiny. S refers to story. In this case, I get 1 destiny point and 1 story point. Storytelling, if I'm of the same sex. However, she is always interested in a good tale, and you spend several hours swapping yarns. My reward for doing that is a story point, and I get the storytelling skill. Now, you may say, oh, you already have the storytelling skill, obviously. Well, that means I get to flip it over to the master level. But if I had no skill, or if I chose to use no skill, it says, and she has no time for the likes of you. In parentheses, there's an italics word, scorned. That is a status effect. Now I'm going into this pile of status effects, and I'm grabbing scorned. And when I get to scorned, it says, effect, all destiny points awarded after receiving this status are changed to story point awards. You may receive no new wealth levels or skills. I'm sorry, I'm not holding that right. To lose this status effect, you may trade this status for the on pilgrimage status, which I can tell you means you have to make a pilgrimage to Mecca to lose it. If you have no destiny points, you immediately trade that status for on pilgrimage. So basically, you screwed up, you get a negative status. There's all kinds of those, and that's what's going to happen. All of the different encounters are going to behave somewhat similarly. Like I said, on the terrain encounters, if your particular type of terrain says that you have to go to N, you're going to go immediately to the reaction matrix to where the N is, but after that, it's still basically the same. The only other thing that's really worth mentioning are the places of power. There are certain places of power on the map which clearly look different, and especially since they have their paths, which is how you travel between different areas, only have arrows pointing outwards, which means you can't normally travel to them. Only certain adventures will allow you access to those. You'll be able to put one of your destination or origin markers down there and travel there whenever you like after you go there as part of an adventure, but you can only do that with one of those locations. And that's usually how you get special treasures. Now, treasures kind of are just like optional things you can use. So, for instance, a seal ring means you can attempt to raise your wealth by basically doing a random dice roll with some special modifiers. If you succeed, you can actually you'll raise your wealth, but if you fail, you'll have to have an encounter with a Ifrit. There's a flying carpet, book of hidden treasures, all kinds of different things. Quests are basically just ways for you to get extra story and destiny points if you can go between 2 different areas and have special encounters. So that's basically how the game is going to continue to progress. You're going to keep moving, having encounters, having adventures, having either positive or negative or nothing at all happen to you. Trying desperately to get your destiny and story point markers up as high as you can get them until you finally meet your own hidden goals that you've set for destiny and story. Then make it back to Baghdad and trigger the final round. That's Tales of the Arabian Nights. When Tales of the Arabian Nights came out, it was definitely one of a kind. I mean, of course, there are all kinds of other tabletop role-playing games from Dungeons & Dragons on, like too many to even count at this point, probably. But having an encapsulated board game storytelling experience with randomly generated adventures and that adventure book and the Matrix and all that thing, all those things put together is a really unique experience. Now, the game Agents of Smersh, which came out last year, which was actually a Kickstarter game, also did this. It was very, very, very similar, except that it was a cooperative game with a spy theme as opposed to the Arabian Nights theme, but also used the book. But really, Tales of the Arabian Nights was kind of put this method of gameplay on the map. And like I said at the beginning, there really have not been a lot of games like this. And I want to stress, I know I'm just kind of dragging out this review at this point, but I want to stress that when I came to this game, I was ready to like it, but had my small amount of doubts about it. And that's because I was very disappointed by Agents of Smersh, but I was kind of hoping that but no one really talks about that game. Everyone talks about how great Tales of Arabian Nights is. And really, I come from an RPG background. I love a good story. I can sometimes playing a really serious, heavy game, like some of the games on my shelf, I try not to take it too seriously, and I make stupid jokes and try to use my imagination and put way more story into the game than there actually is. So this seemed like it was right up my alley, and that's why it's even worse that I was so disappointed in this game. To be very sure, there were times in this game where my friends and I were having a blast and laughing very loudly and just laughing hysterically. Those times were very few and far between, didn't last very long, and in between those moments was very boring gameplay. It took a long time for your turns to get back around. You don't feel all that involved having the reaction matrix for sure. I don't even know why they bother giving. The book tells you to give that to another person. I actually found that the most enjoyable part of this game was being the storyteller, reading from the Book of Tales, because I just loved putting a flourish on it. You know, I love being the DM or the game master whenever I was playing role-playing games. So to me, this was just second nature. That's the part I enjoyed the most, especially when I was reading something horrific that was happening to one of my fellow game players. The problem was, those little fun moments are not the entirety of this game as some people would make you lead you to believe. Most of the game is just boring, moving around, trying to acquire points, but then hitting a story event that makes you lose your points and then just spinning your wheels. And in fact, the most aggravating thing for me in this game wasn't that I didn't win. It wasn't that I was having a hard time trying to win. It was the fact that when it was my turn to have an encounter, and when the person who had the book was reading my adventure and the other person had the reaction matrix and was telling me what was happening to me, it was always very dull and boring. There are a lot of stuff in this game essentially amounts to nothing happens, or nothing much happens, you gain a story point. Nothing much happens, you gain a destiny point. For every one adventure one event or encounter that someone runs into, there's like this grand, epic, funny thing. There's 10 other times where nothing happens. And that's awful. And maybe that's just luck, but still, it's not a very good feeling. I would have rather been crippled and sex changed and all kinds of crazy bad stuff if it meant that I was having a good time. But as it was, I was just kind of sitting there, and the only time I was having fun was reading someone else's grand adventure. That's not good. Now, other stuff that's not good is the fact that someone in the game could be doing incredibly poorly, and someone in the game could just completely run away with it, which happened in both of the games of this that I played. I only was able to sit through 2 games of this. And now again, everyone says the point of this game is not to win, but nevertheless, it just does not feel good when one player is just getting smashed down, can make no progress whatsoever, while one player is doing amazingly well, and not necessarily for the reasons that you think. In one of the games that we played, my friend Scott was able to, was inflicted with the crippled status effects, but the crippled status effect doubles your story points. And he was very lucky with the rest of the encounters that he had that being crippled didn't really have any negative impact and helped him win more and more. But to be honest, in that game, we were happy that he was winning because the rest of us barely had any points at all. We weren't even within throwing distance of our destiny and story point goals. We just wanted him to win as quickly as possible. And that's an awful sign. That's just not a good place to be at when you're playing a game. Do I get why people like this game? I get why people like the storytelling aspect of it. Maybe people house rule it to make the actual gameplay part of this better, but as it is, that game that's at the center of it is bad. It's just bad. And I don't know how you take the storytelling elements out and make it into something better. The characters are just bland. All of your characters don't do anything special, by the way. Everything relies on that book, and it's tough to just focus and have fun with that book when the rest of everything is just so boring. And it, it breaks my heart, man. I really want there to be a storytelling game that I can actually get behind and enjoy because it appeals to me so much. But no one has been able to hit that magic bullet, at least as far as I'm concerned. I'm definitely in the minority here, as are my friends. None of us had fun, but there's definitely a ton of people that love this game, along with Agents of Smersh as well. But I don't know. This is just not for me. I need more of a game there. I just need something to cling on to, something to stay interesting. I just need a little bit of balance so that not just a couple people are sporadically having fun throughout the game. So, anyways, my name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, reminding you to get out there and game every day in every way. Take care.